But what we're seeing is 70% of kids are dropping out of all sports by age 13. Boys are dropping out at twice the rate girls are dropping out. Why? Because it's not fun. Why? Because we're so busy as adults bragging about my kid, these 8U national champion. I mean, give me a break. I mean, like, it's not a thing.
Well, welcome to the Generation Youth Podcast. I'm your host, James McLamb, and I'm here today with a new friend, Kirsten. Hey, how did we connect? Who was it that I saw that you were connecting with? Who was it? I cannot remember right now.
You should put me on the spot. I can see her face. She was on my podcast. She's a fabulous peak performance coach that works
Leah.
with athletes. Yes, thank you.
Leah,
Yes.
When you said peak performance, I was like, it's Leah. Exactly.
Yes.
And she was a guest of ours, and I saw that she had been on yours, and I was like, I started following, and I thought there's a lot of synergy here. And so I wanted to have you as a guest, and I'm excited about our conversation today.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
Well, before we jump in and dive into our conversation, our audience would love to learn a little bit about you. And they get so tired of hearing me talk all the time. So if you wouldn't mind, take a couple of minutes and just introduce yourself to the Generation Youth audience.
Yeah, I'm sure that's not true. You are amazing to connect with, and I loved our energy when we connected earlier, James. And thank you so much for having me on. My name is Kirsten Jones. I'm a peak performance and sports parenting coach. What does that mean? Well, I grew up doing all the things, playing all the sports, like most of us from who grew up in the 70s and 80s. You just played whatever sport was in front of you at the time. Ultimately,
Exactly.
I played basketball and volleyball in high school. I kind of got burned out of basketball because I felt like I played it too much. And so volleyball was a sport I really hadn't played that much of because we didn't have club. I just played a couple months a year. So when I got the opportunity to walk on to a Division I program and eventually earn a scholarship, I thought, this is fun. It's exciting. It's new. I was learning a ton. So I played at San Diego State University and then transferred halfway through it and graduated from William and Mary back in Virginia and had an amazing experience, particularly at Virginia, where playing for a coach who was in my wedding, who is still a part of my life, I still talk to on a monthly basis. So I share all of this because it becomes what we don't think about. And what I like to say is, as you're thinking about your parenting, when your child is looking back one day when they're 25, 30, 35, they're going to tell a story like I just did about their growing up experience of sports. And when you're in the thick of it, if you have a 5, a 7, a 9-year-old, you're on the front end of this. What stories do you want them to be telling about their experience? And when we can think about it in that way, we realize, we have a lot of power in what we're exposing them to and how we're showing up for them as to what's important that they get out of youth sports. So, I ended up going to Europe. I lived in Europe for 10 years. I worked for Nike for 15 years, 6 or 7 over in Europe, and then another, 7 or 8 in Portland and Beaverton, Oregon. So I worked with pro athletes. I worked on the product side. And then one of my favorite jobs was I ran an internal MBA class basically and helped athletes corporate athletes figure out how to collaborate, how to ideate, how to storytell, which I think was the predecessor to what I'm doing now, which is I love helping people figure out what's getting in our way, what's holding us back. So much of what we do as parents, as athletes, as corporate athletes is mental and how we decide to show up. So I have a podcast called #RaisingAthletes, which I've been doing now for about 5.5 years. And then I wrote the book, which came out a year ago, which are really for parents who are, my joke is, but kind of not. When you get pregnant, everybody hands you what to expect when you're expecting, and you think, I'm going to be the best parent ever, right? Like, it's got all the answers in it. I know exactly what to do each week. And then you get to kick and chase, and there's somebody on the sidelines next to you saying, not going to do this rec thing, are you? Like, we're going club. Oh, we're going to Sweden this summer. Oh, we've got a private coach. And you start feeling the FOMO of like, am I doing this wrong? Like, am I a bad parent because I'm not paying for these extra lessons and they're 5 or they're 7? So that's what I like to help is, I'm not a sage from the stage. I'm a guide from the side. I've raised 3 kids. Mine are now 23, 21, and 18. So I'm on the other end of it too. But as I was going through the process and if you're listening, you're probably in the middle of it, speaking about the coaches, the tournaments, the travel, the lack of family time, the lack of time that we get to do anything together because your kid loves baseball or hockey or rugby or whatever it is, which is amazing. But we also know that we only have 18 summers with them. So we want to make sure we are taking advantage of that as well, because about 90% of our parenting, our relationship with our kids happens by the time they're 18.
So many things came to mind as we were going through that. But before we dive into that, I wanted to say that Williamsburg has been one of my favorite places to go to throughout my entire life. About 3 hours drive from here. I think my vehicle could probably get to it on its own. Taking many day trips to Williamsburg. I'm sure you know why I would go to Williamsburg for the day. But my wife and I love going through the campus of William and Mary and the colonial section of it as well. So when you spoke that, I was like, oh, I know exactly what it's going to.
Yeah, you got to hit the cheese shop on Dog Street. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been in that bookstore. I think there's probably something in this office somewhere that I bought in that bookstore if I looked hard enough for it in there.
It's
So
a
yeah.
beautiful place. And it was such an amazing school to attend. There's so much tradition, 4 different presidents went there. So the history and the heritage of that whole area is so storied. And yeah, it was I feel very lucky that I got to go there.
And it's a great story of how it was restored too. So that's another podcast. We could do a podcast too. Well, one of the things that you were talking about, about I love when you said when you're expecting to get a book, but when you have a young athlete or you're going into sports, no one tells you what to do. And that kind of defines, I think, the journey that I had with my oldest two. My oldest daughter, who's 24 now, we put her into different sports when she was real young just to see if there was anything that interests her, the soccer and the basketball. But she was she has asthma. And when she was young, we thought, well, we need something to help her develop that. So a friend said, hey, why don't y'all try swimming? Year-round swimming is like, that's just another world. But the first swim meet that she went to, I was like, okay, this is a disaster. She has no idea what she's doing, and this is going to never go anywhere. But she was enjoying it, so we were supportive. She ended up being a high school All-American in swimming.
Oh.
And, yeah, she made a choice, though, to not go college because she wanted to go to North Carolina State. If you know anything about swimming, they're a top 3 program. And she was like, I am not that good. I'll never be the person who my scores will count. She says, I know these girls. I've swam with these girls. I know who they're recruiting. I am not that person. And so in the schools that were recruiting her stuff, she had no interest going. So she made the choice not to do that. But my son, on the other hand, super athletic, amazingly athletic, played football, basketball, baseball. Baseball was his sport. Baseball was really where he ran track as well. But burnout, lack of grit, lack of determination, really doing that stuff. So I needed that book. What are some of the issues that you tackle, that you have parents come to you? You're a sports parenting coach, you said. So what are they coming to you and saying, I need help with?
Yeah, well, I mean, you hit it right out of the gate, which was, when we were growing up, I kind of have a theory that I lay out in the book, which is when we were growing up, you played because it was fun. In fact, in the 40s and 50s, about 24% of women worked outside of the home. By the 70s and 80s, that number had almost doubled. So now you had two parents, nearly, half of two parents. Now it's 70 to 80%. Both mom and dad are working outside of the home or co-parenting, working outside of the home. So what are we going to do with the kids? We used to be able to just open the door, let them run out. When the lights, when it got dark outside, they would come back. Well, in 1979, Adam Walsh gets abducted. 38 million people tune in to find out that the world's a very scary place. You can't just let your kids go out and play in the street. Around the same time, early 1980s, a report comes out that the Americans are falling further and further academically behind. We used to be the leaders in the world, and now No Child Left Behind, we're falling further and further. So we have parents not home. It's a scary place. We can't just send them out anymore. And now we need help. So at the same time, dads are mostly dads, sometimes moms, but mostly dads are saying, you know what? I can help coach the baseball team. So totally goodwill, right? Like, I want to spend time with Johnny. Johnny wants to play baseball. Sure, I'll coach. So I think is when that kind of started happening, right? And in the 70s and 80s, that started happening. And you're like, okay, this is great. But then at the same time, we started getting competitive about that. What if we got all five of those guys? Did you see that one athlete and the other 10 will bring him in? So now you have, I hear this all the time when I go to speak. Oh, my husband's the coach for the 7U baseball team and he's got spreadsheets, he's got a draft. They're like, we are making it so competitive so early. And those are the issues I start to address in the book. And they're all true stories. Sometimes names have been changed to protect the innocent, but a kid who loved golf, his dad loved golf. So he takes him to the driving range at 5, and the club pro says, gosh, he's got a great swing. So they start investing in lessons. The next thing you know, he's playing on a junior tour. He says, the next thing, we're taking all 5 kids to all of these different golf events for the next 10 years. One day we win the lottery. Stanford comes calling his sophomore year of high school. He gets a full ride to Stanford in golf. He's like, this is the best thing ever. We are the best parents ever. He said, until about a month before he's supposed to leave for Stanford, he says, Mom, Dad, we need to talk. I said, yeah, son? He said, I'm not going to Stanford and I'm never playing golf again.
Wow.
What happened? Is that bad parenting? No, I don't think that's bad parenting, but I do think that's what's happening a lot. Because what I say is you need to keep checking in with your kid. They loved it at 5. They loved it at 8. They loved it at 10. But because we are moving the professionalization of youth sports that's happening at a lower and lower level, the amount of reps, the amount of time, the amount of commitment, I'm seeing so many kids, by the time they get to 18, they're done. They've been doing this for their whole life. They don't have a life. They just want to go be a kid. And oh, by the way, you missed that window because you've been at travel tournaments or in golf courses this whole time. So again, there are the Tiger Woods that they asked for everything. Those do exist. And I'm not saying your kid isn't one of those, but I am saying as a parent, the advice that I would err on the side of caution. And again, my oldest was like basketball obsessed. I have a very vivid memory of, we're going whitewater rafting, okay? And he sat in the back of that raft like this the whole time as a freshman, because why do we have to be here? There's a tournament going on in Vegas. It's July, it's 120 degrees. I'd rather be in Vegas, right? Well, dude, you're 14.
Yeah, because it's cool in Vegas in July.
Yeah. Nobody's recruiting you at 14 or 15 years old. And we talk about that vacation. You remember going to Jackson Hole and going whitewater rafting? He's like, yeah, that was awesome. I was like, great. So do you remember what happened when you were in the raft? He's like, no, I don't, what are you talking about? I said, the pouting in the back of the raft? He's like, no, I didn't do that. He doesn't even remember that there was this whole incident with it, because because I have parents ask me that a lot. Well, yeah, but I've got one of those kids that they don't want to miss anything, which is great. But find the times to say, you know what? We're going to go to grandma's 100th birthday. This is a milestone that probably will never happen again. We're not going to miss the championship soccer game, but we're going to miss, the 55th summer tournament, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we need to find and prioritize what are our values as a family, and then make sure that the sport is fitting around it. If your child is good enough, I remember speaking to Bobby Hurley at one point, and we were living in Buffalo when he was coaching at UB. And he said, if your kid's good enough, we'll find you in the middle of a field in Kansas, right? Literally. He's like, it's not about that. So I know parents, you get this FOMO of, no, we have to be at every event. We have to go to everything. And you do. Your kid wants it. You want it. It's exciting and it's fun. And again, at some point, you'll be telling the story. And what are you going to be talking about?
Well, when you said, what story do you want them to tell? That was hitting home to me, because I started reflecting on my son's career. I became his coach. I was one of these, because he was, how old was he? 6 years old. And we had joined this league, and the coaches were just berating kids and yelling at kids in the outfield. You're pathetic. And I'm like, they're 6. And then they were like, you guys, need to shape it up. We're going to take half of you to a tournament this weekend. And I wouldn't let my son be involved with that. And I'm thinking, 6 years old is a tournament. And at the same time, I started reading a book. I think it's called Baseball, the Ripken Way, by Cal and Billy Ripken.
Okay.
And they discouraged in that book travel teams until they were at least high school age, which, that would be when you would have to kick in, because beyond that, if you're traveling team, you're playing college ball. And so that was kind of my mindset. But I always felt like he was missing out on something because of that. And because of this, and his identity did get wrapped up in sports, so much so that when he got high school and had an injury and could not play, it totally messed him up. Even though he was cleared the last day of tryouts to try out, the coach came and said, "We don't think you're ready to play. We don't need you this year." And this was a new school for him and new coaches, and it just totally, messed him up in that way. So
And
I
at a
feel like
bigger
there was some
level,
FOMO.
yeah, we're seeing that in a bigger way, James, now, because what's happening is, and there was a great book out this year by Jennifer Wallace called Never Enough. And she talked a lot about what's going on at, at a societal level. And what we're seeing is everything's about what college you're going to get into and what thing you're excelling at. So is it basketball or whatever sport or a musical instrument or whatever? And so what our kids are not experiencing, and there's a 45-year study by Harvard about the most not only successful but happy, content, whatever, pick your adjective, adults were the ones that had chores as a child, who had other responsibilities to the family. And I think if you look back and ask a lot of parents our age, did you have chores? We all did. We had to make our bed, we had to feed the dog, we had to walk, we had do all these other, mow the lawn, we had to do these other things. And now, because no, you got 5 a.m. swim practice, you don't have time to do the dishes, you don't have time. So your only job is to be this athlete and to, oh, by the way, get the 4.5 because that is going to get us into the right school. So when they get injured, or when there's something that throws a wrench in it, they don't know who they are. And I had this happen at my kitchen table because of COVID. My second son wasn't getting recruited because in his pajamas for 15 months, right, and wasn't really getting any exposure. And he sat at the kitchen counter and cried, and he said, "What am I if I'm not a basketball player? That's the only thing I know how to do." And I was devastated as a parent. I'm like, I am a horrible parent if you think that your only value is as a basketball player. Like, that's great if you want to play, but I could care less if you decide to play at the next level. If you want to play, that's fine. But now the kids, they have no agency. They have no, oh, I do this and I have an instrument and I have hobbies and I volunteer here. There's no time to do that because they're full-time pro athletes.
There's confession time on me. For my daughter, it was obvious that swimming is what she wanted to do. It fit her lifestyle, fit what she did. She enjoyed it. She was pushing us. And because if you're a swim parent, you understand this. Those things, those swim meets are like torture to go through. Your child is doing something. If you have a fast child, they're doing something maybe 5 minutes and you're there for like 6 hours. And it's just horrible. Where if you're watching a team sport, at least there's action going on. Even if it's not your kid, there's something happening you can watch and get involved in. But my son, I feel like we probably, and the confession would be, is that we probably placed too much emphasis on the fact that he was good at baseball. I was a good coach at baseball. We did things together on this. So much so that when he could not play, he did not want to come home that spring. And so I said, well, just go find if the track coach needs anybody. He was like, well, I've never done track. I was like, they don't cut on track very often. You can find a spot. And he ended up being, pretty good and he got recruited by the assistant football coach to play football. And they were like, well, why haven't you ever played football with us before? He was like, well, I've always been playing baseball. And then I'm like, oh gosh, did I mess up? Did I make a mistake? Now he's got to learn a whole new sports skill set. And they're saying, oh, you've got great talent. If you'd have been doing this for years, you would be one of our, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm all messed up at this point in time. So how do we help these confused parents guide through this? Because you're right. I mean, they're looking and they're seeing the Joneses over here and the McLambs over here getting their kid doing everything. And they're like, well, my kids are not doing enough. I need to do that because I'm letting them down. So how do we help them through this? I don't know what to say to them.
So the later you delay the specialization, the better, because you don't have burnout, as we talked about. You don't have as many overuse injuries because you're using your body in different ways. And the better the athlete you'll be. So over 90% of NFL athletes played multiple sports growing up, mostly because there isn't a club system. So it kind of helps them. They only have the season to play. So they are kind of forced to go run track or play baseball or do something else. But most of the D1 programs say, we want guys who have played multiple sports. They're better athletes. In fact, that was the story. When I got to San Diego State, the coach said to me, you're not a very good volleyball player, but you're a really good athlete. But don't worry, we can train you how to play volleyball. So what coaches, and I've talked to a lot of D1, particularly basketball coaches, and they say, I can watch a guy and I can see what his ceiling is because, oh yeah, he's been playing since he was 5. And I can see like, okay, he's probably peaked. He's probably reached the level of his potential. But I can see a kid who has only been playing for 2 years, but the way he moves, the way he reacts, his instincts, I can teach him how to shoot the ball. But
Mm-hmm.
I can't teach you how to be more athletic. And if you are more athletic because you've had more variety. In fact, we had Steve Kerr on our podcast and he was talking about multi-sport athletes and he brought up Steve Nash. And he said, Steve Nash was the first guy I ever saw that went under the basket to score. He would go under the basket and come back out. And he said, I asked him, Steve, so why do you go under the basket? He goes, well, I grew up playing hockey. He goes, in hockey, you go behind the goal to score. And Steve was like, I never thought of that. He goes, he thought differently, which led to, he wasn't very tall. So he needed to have other ways to solve his issues, right? So when you think about it that way, like it's not always the biggest or the fastest or the best that win. It's the ones that are able to problem solve in the moment. And that comes by seeing a variety of different angles on things. So parents keep them playing I think what you did was great. He was able to pick up track and then ultimately football because he had this other tool set, not in spite of it.
When you said the thing about Steve Kerr and the hockey, it reminded me of the story of Tom Glavine on when they said, why are you so good? He was a gold glove winner. I think he ranks real high as the number of gold gloves won by pitchers. Pitcher for the Atlanta Braves, spent a little bit of time with the Mets, but Braves is what he's known for. And they was like, why are you so good at this? He was like, well, I was a goalie. I was a goalie growing up. And he said, so there's nothing that they're going to hit back at me that I've not seen twice as fast and a whole lot smaller that I've had to stop. He said, so, of course I can catch it.
Yeah.
So it makes the thing they're going for. So yeah, parents do struggle with this. They want them to be involved, but there is that thing like, oh, if I don't get them in some kind of specialized sports, because there's a whole industry that is pushing this. They're fighting upstream. They're almost like salmon, trying to swim upstream. They're going against the grain, walking against the crowd as the crowd's going back, and it keeps pushing them out if they want to do this. Everything's telling them they got to do this and they got to do this. But you're right. The research is showing that it's not what's best for the child.
And when we think beyond just sport, which, by the way, the ball stops bouncing for us all, or the puck, or whatever metaphor you want to use. So, what are the tools you want your child to have to be a successful, risk-taking, gritty human, which means feeling uncomfortable, getting used to not getting what you want on the first go round, trying things when you're not the best. So, being a beginner, having a beginner's mindset around, right now, for the first time ever, I've tried mahjong yesterday with a group of women that are like, oh, you should play this game. And it was fun to look at it as, I don't need to be the best. I don't even know what the words are that I'm supposed to be using, but it's taken me 54 years to get comfortable with, oh, I don't know how this is played. I have to, I think our kids are so conditioned to, you get a lesson, you have to, I have a client, she's a surfer, and her mom said, well, if you're a good surfer, we should be able to take you skateboarding, and took her to the skateboard park. And the 10-year-old looked at her and said, what do you want me to do? She said, well, just try it. She goes, well, why? How would I do that? I haven't had a lesson. So we're creating these kids that unless there comes instructions what they're supposed to do, they don't even have the curiosity to say, oh, let me just go try surfing. Let me go try. Again, it doesn't have to be about a trophy or the top team. It could be, it's not all of us are driven competitively, right? That's the other thing. I get parents, I was coaching the 9U team for a couple of years in volleyball. Parents would come up hat in hand. I'm so sorry. What are you sorry about? Well, we're getting to volleyball really late. She's 9. Like, no, you're not late. And what else does she do? Well, she's in the ballet and she plays piano and she's trying everything. Like,
Yeah.
That's what you want them to be doing, exploring.
And I don't think there's enough free play. I mean, in the book,
No.
Anxious Generation, that's one that came out this past spring. That's one of the tenets of the arguments is that we're not giving children enough free play. I learned how to play baseball and basketball, even though I'm vertically challenged to play that sport. I learned to play just goofing around on the
Yeah.
field. During recess, our teachers just let us go. There was no organization there. There was no safety, equipment out there. What we were playing on would kill people these
Well, you're
days.
also making up the rules. You're
Yeah,
deciding who's in and out. I mean, everything now is adult driven, and that's a problem. Like they need to go to the park and just play. And maybe you lose and maybe you win. And I mean, you look at Sabrina Ionescu. She had two older brothers who were much older than her. Her parents worked 7 days a week. She would go across the street to the park and play against grown men. And she's like, I mostly lost, but I also learned a lot about who I am and how gritty I could become because I knew, okay, there's no expectation for me to be a 24-year-old man as a 12-year-old girl, but what if I can figure out how to get around him, right?
yeah.
That's what you're looking for them to learn.
I didn't see my son when he was in high school doing as much free play because it was so much. I've got to be at this practice, and there were demands from the coaches when he was not under me. He was other coaches to be there. When I was growing up in the '80s, it was more of I get through. You talked about chores and stuff. I grew up on a farm. We didn't have chores. We had work. We did
Yes.
not. There's chores. No. Chore. I wish I had grown up doing chores. I was working as soon as I was old enough to walk. I was working the farm.
Same.
So,
I grew
but
up in
when I got through,
Montana on a ranch too, so we had same.
oh yeah, so we know
What
exactly
people
what's good.
It's what people can relate to, though. So I just say chores. But yes, it's a job. You got to feed the horses. You got to muck the stalls. You got to,
Yeah,
yeah, you got to buck the bales. Yeah, you got to pick the rock.
yeah. That fall time it meant hay baling season, and I hated that because it's hot in the south. I mean, that's just totally different. That'll give me nightmares. I'll have PTSD if I keep this up. But I would get through on a Saturday, and I'd come to the house, and my mom would have had a note on my door or somewhere that says, "Hey, got a call. You got to call B-ball at Eric's at 4 p.m." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I got to go get ready." And I'd drive over to a friend's house who had, a little bit larger dirt area in his backyard, that was hard that we could play basketball in. And, there would be like 8 of us. And we would just, pick teams and play hours, just hours of just ridiculous play until the sun went down or we got kicked off or something. So he didn't have that opportunity that I saw
Yeah.
as much. And I think that hurts him too, because they don't find the joy in I played a lot of adult sports before I started coaching him. And I look back on it now and I'm very competitive. And my wife used to say, "Oh, it's because you like to win and you like playing it." Yeah, there's part of that, but it's more the camaraderie. And I don't think he got the camaraderie, the
Hmm.
joy of having those, working out those relationships and how to pick each other up and how to support each other. And
Well,
you
if I
learn
could
a
give one
lot.
tip too, James, about what you were doing, which is brilliant, and I wrote about it in the book too. My husband coached both of the boys, and then I coached one of them and coached my daughter in different sports. But I believe instead of let's worrying about the trophy, I mean, story in there, true story here in LA, where a 5-year-old got cut because that baseball team didn't see the potential in him for 2 years from now when they started playing travel ball. Like, what 5-year-old should be cut from any baseball team, right? So instead of judging yourself as a coach on, well, we won the league, tell me how many of your athletes signed up the next year.
Mm.
That is the true mark of a great coach. If they walk away from that sport and said, that was fun and I learned a lot, friends, fun, and fundamentals. I learned how to, field a ball. I learned how to swing a bat. I learned how to cheer my teammates on when I wasn't playing. And I made some new friends and I had fun doing it. Gee, what do you think? You want to sign up next year? Yeah, let's try it. But what we're seeing is 70% of kids are dropping out of all sports by age 13.
Mm.
Boys are dropping out at twice the rate girls are dropping out. Why? Because it's not fun. Why? Because we're so busy as adults bragging about my kid, these 8U national champion. I mean, give me a break. Like that's not a thing. Like, you don't need to be a national champ at 8 or 10 or 12. Like, great, you won your region. Great, you're the best in the area. But if you need to fly to Canada to win the national, the world championship for 8U, like you're completely missing the boat. And that's exactly why these kids are quitting, because they're not having fun, because the parents are more invested than the kids are.
I appreciate what Ripken said when they said delay it as long as possible. But when you were talking about flying somewhere, it made me think they do have 3 sports complexes for baseball for all different ages for them to come. So there's a little bit of hypocrisy in that, hey, we don't think you should do it, but if you're going to do it, we want to make money off of you. So there's a
Well, now
little
you're
bit of
seeing, so
that.
it's a $37 billion business, youth sports, right now.
Holy
Right now,
moly.
within the next 3 to 5 years, they're expecting it to be a $50 billion business. Now, private equity is jumping in the game, so now you're going to see even more money. So people are following the dollar signs, right? There are whole
Mm,
towns. Sports tourism is popping up in the middle of Oklahoma, where it used to be a farming town, and now we put in 15 fields and 25 basketball courts, and now the hotel business is thriving and the restaurant business is so it's building around that whole model. That, again, I know parents that have 2 jobs or 3 jobs just to pay for the travel, just to drive, to Oklahoma, to spend every waking moment doing that. And again, by 13, 14, the kids are like, and I had a story in the book, a true story, a woman I met, and I was at Target, and I was buying a chair for the soccer game. We were living in New York at the time, in Buffalo, New York, and it was raining sideways, and she's like, "Oh, what are you doing?" I said, "I'm going to my son's soccer game." She goes, "Oh, I went through that." And I said, "Oh," I said, "Did your son play?" She said, "Yes." And I was so sad when it ended, and I said, "You're graduating from high school. Aren't you so sad that soccer ended?" And he said, "Oh, mom, I stopped loving soccer about 5 years ago, but I just played because I knew it made you happy."
oh, wow.
So back to my earlier point, keep checking in. Is this your dream? In chapter 2, whose dream is it? Are we
Yeah.
doing this because you really want it, because you never played at the right level? You need the glory? Or is it what the child still really wants?
That is so important to do. And we did check in with Jacob occasionally. And I asked him recently, several months ago, we were having dinner. He was at the house. We were having dinner, and he's 21 now. And I asked him, I said, so of everything you played, what did you enjoy the most? And I really thought he was going to say football, because really after he got hurt and those coaches said no, he just said, I'm going to hang up my cleats, those cleats, and put on this other. I'm going to go that direction. And he even said the team atmosphere on track and football is much better than it is on baseball. And maybe it was just the culture that
Mm,
was created by that school, but he enjoyed it. But he said, no, I still loved baseball the most playing. And I was like, really?
mm.
That's kind of shocking. I was not expecting that. And it
Could
had
he articulate why? Did he tell you why?
well, I didn't ask. I just kind of thought on my own. It may be because the way football was ending was first, he was a junior the spring of 2020. So his senior year
Mm,
was 20 to 21. And you really don't have to say anything else to anyone in America, just
mhm.
dates now, and they know what they went
Yep.
through. So
Yep.
that kind of ruined it all, because they were like, he was like, hey, do I have potential to play? He went to the coaches and they were like, you know what? You could probably play. We could help you get maybe a D2 school. There's several in the state. Yeah, we think you can get on there. Maybe a FCS school, but maybe you have to walk on there at it and earn yourself some opportunities. He said, because you don't have the experience that some of the other players did. And so he was looking forward to that. And that summer,
Mm.
he had already was looking forward to camps and going and showcasing and doing stuff. And of course, that all went out the window. They didn't even play in the
And
fall here in North Carolina. They ended up playing in the spring with a shortened season. It was
well,
just
and
a
we can talk
mess.
about that too. Like, if your child is, they, and some are, right? Like mine, that's what they wanted to do. Both of my boys were like, we definitely want to play in college. That's our dream. That's amazing. And then there is the catching the dream and actually making it. And my older son ended up playing at Boston University, got there right when COVID hit, didn't leave his dorm room for 6 months, had, with COVID and the transfer portal and everybody being able to stay for 3 years, had, you know, first 12 guys ahead of him, then 9 guys ahead of him. Like, they have to really want it. It is a full time job. They own you. And I don't care what level you play. I mean, D3, I think, to me, is what D1 was back when I played. It's, you're a great student. You're there to be a student. You get to have fun playing a sport, but it doesn't have to consume you. And it can be this amazing experience. My oldest was at BU. He's now getting his master's in business, and he's at a D3, and he's like, I'm having so much fun playing basketball again, because I didn't even think that
Mm.
was possible. So make sure when you're asking them, what is it they want? Is it the rah rah? Is it to be a part of a big school? Some kids will say, I don't care. I just want to be on the roster. that may be true, but you're still going to be putting in the 50, 60 hours of work and
Yeah.
never getting on the floor. Like, that's a big commitment for never getting a chance to get to play.
I do appreciate that you're encouraging them to delay the specialization. The very first image that you said on that was as I drive to the gym, I pass a middle school. And in the spring, this past year in the spring, when it was February, as the kids were walking to the school with their baseball backpacks on, I have played and coached enough to be able to spot that's a $90 backpack that kid's got on, and those two bats in there are about $400 a piece. He's got $1,000 worth of equipment on him, not counting his glove and his shoes that I can't see, and probably got some nice batting gloves, and who knows what else is in that bag. There's over 1,000, and their parents are putting all this into them, which they think is going to help their kids' athletic ability, which it really doesn't. I mean, I think for the elites, the nice equipment maybe takes it a little higher, but for most, it's just a really pretty thing to
Well,
have.
and for parents, as you're evaluating that, right? Like, that's part of the, I think the frog in the pot, right? Like, in our parents' generation, I think K through 12, maybe my parents spent like $700, a pair of shoes every year. You didn't buy uniforms. You didn't, like, we weren't traveling anywhere. There were no other
Mhm.
costs. But when you're spending 5 to 7 to 15 to $20,000 a season for your kid to play whatever sport it is, right? You're all in. So, and by the way, we're not going to church anymore because we don't have time. We don't belong to the community center. We don't have other activities either. So, the number of parents that reach out to me that are like, no, my kid can't stop playing. Those are my friends, right? Like, and my kid can't not be the starting whatever because that's my ego that's on the line because they've always been the best. So,
Mm.
I just say this to check yourself when you're talking to your child. And if things like, well, this is just way too expensive, you better be starting because I've paid a lot of money for this, are coming out of your mouth, that is the worst thing for your child to hear. That my love is contingent upon you getting this outcome based on the money that I'm spending, right?
Mm.
And I know no parent does that intentionally, but even if I've heard that over and over. I was at a volleyball tournament in Kansas City last spring and walked by this court. The daughter's in tears, the mom's upset, and the dad said, why did I even waste my money? If you want to do this next time on your own, you can waste my money on your own. I'm sure he was upset that she didn't play or she played bad or they lost or whatever the situation was. But again, thinking about that long-term story that she's going to tell. Oh gosh, I remember that tournament in Kansas City like it was yesterday when I was 15. That's going to stick with her.
There's so many things that we could discuss because when you hit that, two stories came to mind, and I wish we had more time for this, but one when I was coaching I was assistant coach of baseball, and a parent just going ballistic because their kid was horrible, and the kid was never going to be good. It just didn't have that ability, but it was having fun, and our head coach had to walk the dad away from the field and talk to him, and
Mm.
basically told him, if you can't control it, I'm going to ask the rec staff to remove you. And then another time when my daughter was swimming, and she was in she was one of the elite swimmers in the last heats and stuff. One of the early swimmers, it was a new family to our team, very young person. And this girl was just out there swimming. She was not going, if she, honestly, if she made it down and back, I think her dad should have jumped up and cheered because I thought she was going to drown a couple of times. It was there. And he was flipping out. And
Mm.
I even took a picture of him and posted it and said, if you see this, Dad, because that was kind of harsh. I shouldn't have done that, but I hope he's not
Yeah, I
listening.
don't advise that.
But I was like, what is this my guy's problem? My daughter
Yeah.
stopped in her first race, stopped, turned and asked the judge, can I continue? And they were like, well, if you can swim it, you can. And I was like, okay, we're never going to be any good at this. That was what was in my mind, but we stayed with it. So those two things about parents' attitudes, so that's a whole new thing we could go through as well. But
Well, yeah. And so again, check yourself. And sometimes you're not
yeah.
being the obnoxious parent, but opening story in the book is some family in Pennsylvania paid a skywriter to fly
Oh,
a banner
really?
over the baseball diamond that said, fire Coach Smith and Coach Kowalczyk. Not because the team was bad, they were 17-1. Not because they didn't like the coaches. In fact, everybody liked the coaches, but because their kid wasn't playing. So what message is your son seeing when
Mm.
he has to look at his teammates and see that his parent is paid to fly this flag over his baseball game, his 15U baseball game? You are not enough. I will take care of this. You're not teaching them agency or grit or resilience or teaching them how to fight their own battles, right? And that's what we're not helping our kids do is adult. I mean, now there are books that say adulting into their 20s and 30s, right? Like literally, we are now talking about how do you help your 28-year-old, right?
Yeah.
When we were 18, our parents waved goodbye to us and said, good luck, we'll see you at Christmas or whatever, the holidays, right?
Those of us
Now
who worked on
we're
a farm, our parents said goodbye to us very early and said, go out and do this. You're responsible for lives of things.
Yes, you were given responsibility, which gave you that sense of agency. That's what our kids are not getting when we say, well, they do sports. Well, not if you're there, masticating their food for them at every turn. You're fighting their coaches. You're fighting for their playing time. If your kid's gone to more than 2 or 3 clubs in the last 2 or 3 years, what's the common denominator there,
Hmm.
right? You're not allowing them to be uncomfortable. And if you can teach your kid how to get comfortable being uncomfortable, gosh, you're not getting playing time. What are you going to do about that, son? Well, and let's brainstorm. Well, I could go talk to the coach. Great. What are the other ideas? Well, you could ask for feedback from your teammates. Well, that's a good idea. Okay, I could ask, does anybody else see this? Right? Like these are the tools and skills that are going to make them when they have that first job, when they have that first
Hmm.
relationship, versus, oh, I'm just going to delete. Oh, I'm just to ignore. Oh, I'm going to ghost them. Right? That's what we're raising as a generation of kids that like don't know how to deal with conflict at all.
How can our audience connect with you to continue this conversation and find out more of the resources that you have so that they can, really raise teen athletes in a positive way? And really, it's almost like you're raising athletic parents. You got to raise
Yes.
them first. The kids are a byproduct of fixing the parents' attitude, which is the case in so many different things.
We need to learn how to self-regulate. And by the way, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, right? So if you see yourself freaking out a lot, and say that, oh my gosh, I did not handle that. I just didn't do a good job. Allow them to see you getting off at the wrong exit or messing up on your report for work or whatever allows them to see like we're not perfect either and we don't expect
Hmm.
you to be perfect. But yes, I have a podcast as well, hashtag Raising Athletes, that you can find wherever you find podcasts, and interviewing a lot of wonderful people about these topics. I have the book, and then I created a course, Mindset Mastery, that I'm going to launch a new version of it this fall, I think
Oh,
middle
wow.
of October. So if you would love to, and I'm working on tools for the athletes specifically so that they could take me in their pocket when they get ready to play so that they
Hmm.
can be, I believe what we're listening to, what we focus on expands. So giving them tools that can go directly into the athlete's ears so that they can be getting ready for game time.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. And this could have gone on a lot more because it's like confession time for me. It's giving me a chance to look back. I had a guest a few years ago called Mark McKinney who wrote a book called The Ride Home, where he was talking about his son coming home from a golf match and how he was so mad and that he was driving down 85 in South Carolina going at least 95, and his mom looked in the back seat and saw scared children and said, guys, I want you to remember this time that your dad almost killed us because of a golf tournament that he had no control over. And it was after that that he was realizing I need to correct myself. And that became a confession time for me as I
Mhm.
do it. And so today it's more a confession time that I feel like there were some errors that I made on being overzealous.
Well, and if I could leave the audience with that, is the only 6 words our kids need to hear us say in the car ride home: I love to watch you play.
Yeah.
That's it. Not that that coach sucked or that ref sucked or that player's. By the time they've gotten to the ice cream store, most of them have gotten over it. And if they haven't, give them the night. And the next day, if you still just can't stand it, hey, buddy, do you want to talk about last night's game? If they do, they'll say, yeah, sure, let's talk about it. And if they've moved on, go talk to your spouse about it. Go talk to your buddy about it. But keep bringing it into the future for them, into the present, is not what they need.
Yeah.
They're ready to move on to the next thing.
Well, thank you so much for your time with us, and thank you, audience, Hey, look, if you've stuck with us for almost 50 minutes, you've obviously found some value in the conversations we have, or you left it on by mistake. One of the two, I don't know.
Let's go
But
with A.
Let's go with A. But if it is A, then what we'd like for you to do, we would love for you to like and comment on this. But the most important thing is sharing, because someone that you know needs to hear this message, needs to connect with Kirsten and learn more about this to help them be better parents of athletes. So please share it with someone, and so that this message can get out. And thank you again for your time today. And thank you,
James.
audience.
This was wonderful.
And we'll see everyone again very soon on the Generation Youth Podcast.